Today is part 2 of my interview with MJ, a trauma expert, about the devastation of infidelity. Now, I hope that part 1 was as affirming and insightful for you as it was for me and so many people I've already talked to. Today is part 2, and you probably noticed from part 1 it was a little bit longer than we typically film here, but it's important that we give you the interview in its entirety so that we can help you with information, with insight, with really helping both spouses and both partners come to an understanding of what each other is facing. So today is a little bit longer, but it's part 2. I hope it encourages you and gives you hope. So, I wish I knew this early on, because this is like riveting stuff on how to get through this ungodly warfare of emotions, perceptions, complete just confusion and helplessness, right? And so now let's talk about leaning out, because in our discussions prior to this, you said some stuff that I think is just brilliant about what the betrayed spouse does that's labeled a leaning out behavior. Because I think it will help the betrayeds go, okay, now I know why I'm doing that, and it'll help the unfaithful go, okay, hold on, now I get it. So take a few minutes and speak to that.
So we talked before about the leaning in can be the fight response.
Right.
And it can look like yelling, demanding, hypervigilance, I need to know if I'm safe. Sometimes people have that flight response or the leaning out response. So one way that will look, the amygdala detects danger. The person perceives maybe I'm being abandoned and betrayed again.
Right.
One response is to create some physical and emotional distance. Oh no, I think you're going to hurt and harm me. I'm moving away from the danger. It can literally be somebody leaving the room.
Yeah.
It can be, I'm going to close off my heart to you. I'm not going to talk with you. I'm going to do behavior so that you can't get in. That's not a physical leaving, but it's an emotional safety happening. Sometimes when people perceive abandonment and betrayal might be happening, their brain does something. It actually spurs them to abandon and betray the person they think is abandoning and betraying them. It's almost like, I think you're going to hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you first so you can't hurt me. It's on my terms.
Right.
It's not that conscious.
But it is an empowering kind of reaction of, I'm going to either hurt you or push you away before you do that to me, because I'm in distress. And I think it's safe to say, as an unfaithful, we read that as, he's going to cheat on me now, or she's now going to, leave me forever, and she's going to file, or he's going to file, and all these different things, when in reality, they're in distress. And this is a leaning out behavior, and if I'm wrong, speak to it, to protect themselves mentally and emotionally, right?
Absolutely. It's a safety-seeking behavior.
And that's exceptional. Safety-seeking behavior.
Yes.
It's not an intent to rage on their partner. It's not an intent to make them suffer necessarily. It's not an intent to shame them.
Right.
It is a safety-seeking behavior.
Remember, we are animals. This is a primal response. There's a biological process happening that's either going to lean us in for safety or help us lean out for safety.
Right.
Now, there's a dynamic I want to talk about that happens frequently when couples have experienced infidelity and attachment distress. And I call it, come here, go away, where the hell are you going?
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I love it.
So here's what it can look like.
Okay.
Let's imagine the betrayed spouse perceives her unfaithful partner is betraying or abandoning her again. She might ask come here. I need to know if you are safe for me.
Yeah.
What's going on? Honey, tell me. I detect this thing. Tell me what's going on. It's that come closer for safety.
Yeah.
But then she says, oh no, you really are dangerous. I think more abandonment and betrayal is happening. Go away. Get away from me. I'm out. The leaning out. But then as he's leaving, she gets hit with more attachment distress and she says, where the hell are you going? Get back over here. And so it can become, I don't know if you should come close to me for safety or move away from me for safety. And so very often we'll see betrayed partners spinning out. Come here, go away. Come here, go away. It's crazy making to them. It's crazy making to their partner. But it makes sense when we recognize the betrayed partner is being hit with all of that adrenaline and is trying to create safety and doesn't know, do I go to you for safety or away from you for safety?
And we didn't talk about this, but that would explain why oftentimes the betrayed spouse, male or female, will sometimes want to be physically intimate and then say, oh my gosh, the thought of being intimate with you disgusts me. But wait a minute, I want to be physically intimate, right?
Yes.
So that's exactly a safety-seeking behavior, is sometimes you want to be intimate, and that's why the unfaithful goes, we just had sex 2 nights ago. Now you're telling me you're going to file. You're going to take the kids from, right? I mean,
yes. What is perceived as safe in one moment, 5 minutes later, could be perceived as danger.
And that's not because the betrayed spouse is a whack job, freaking out, may not even have PTSD.
Right.
They're just dealing with the intensity of the distress that they are experiencing because of the infidelity or the multiple infidelities, right?
Yes. As the healing is happening with couples and the couple experiences more and more trust building and more safety, the attachment distress resolves.
So I talk a lot about being a safe place for the betrayed's anger or unpredictability or just emotion. And you earlier kind of hinted at sometimes the unfaithful can just be there, right? In that moment. So maybe kind of speak to that.
Yes. When betrayed spouses are scared, when they aren't sure that they are safe with their unfaithful partner, and they'll do behaviors to create safety, the safety-seeking behaviors. And they might lean in. They might yell. They might demand. They might interrogate. Am I safe with you? Am I safe with you? That's usually the yelling is all code for, are you with me? Do you have my back? Are you keeping me safe? But it can sound aggressive.
Right.
Sometimes the betrayed spouse will back up, will either physically leave or will emotionally protect his or her heart from further pain. Sometimes the betrayed spouse will stay, will become overwhelmed, will paralyze and lose his or her words. For an unfaithful spouse, when they see that their person is in distress, we talked about recognizing the biological function that's happening, doing their very best to not become defensive, staying. Let's talk about being a safe, consistent presence.
Yeah.
If abandonment and betrayal has happened, there's an attachment break and distress. The worst thing that can happen after that is more attachment breaks and distress.
Right.
So when somebody is overwhelmed and they're spinning out, they're either fighting or they're flighting or they're freezing. The unfaithful spouse, if they can stay, if they can be present and not go anywhere and ask, what can I do to care for you? And do that over time, that helps create safety in the relationship. I think about a couple I had in my office the other day. They are repairing their relationship. He identifies as having a sex addiction. There's been a lot of betrayal in the relationship. When she, the betrayed spouse, has primal panic moments, when she is scared, he told me he will take a slight step back and he will sit so that he's not standing over her. He said, I realize in those moments when she's spinning out, I'm a threat. She perceives me as danger. And so I do this movement to make myself less threatening. And so if she's standing up, he'll sit down. If she's sitting down, he sometimes sits on the floor. That he's trying to show her, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not trying to hurt you, and I'm not a threat, I'm not going to attack you.
I'm safe for you to emote and to let you be free. Because I was such a control freak when Samantha would rage or when she would shut down and I would panic. And we as the unfaithful overread so much of the betrayed's behavior. We flip out, we think it's over.
You get scared.
Yeah, we get scared. That's exactly right. We think we're done, it's over, whatever. And I think it is so insightful for us to be able to understand what's going on a deeper level, because we really can't fix it. All we can do is make it safe, right?
Let's talk about that freeze response that you're saying. When Samantha would freeze, that would scare you, and you might think, oh no, it's over.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to address that by talking about what happens in the brain. So let's go back to the amygdala scans for danger, sends out the signal for adrenaline. Adrenaline causes our heart rate to increase. So our heart will start beating faster, right? And the blood pumps faster and we often heat up. We also experience a harder time breathing. The adrenaline can cause us to breathe from the top half of our lungs. Now, when the adrenaline is coursing through our bodies and our heart rate goes up, there's a threshold. If our heart rate goes over 100 beats per minute, it impacts our brain. This front part of our brain, it's the frontal lobe. This is the part of our brain that controls impulses and critical thinking. If our heart rate goes over 100 beats per minute, it impacts how well we can access the frontal lobe. So recognize this. If our heart rate is too high, we have trouble accessing our frontal lobe, and that means we cannot control our impulses like we do when we are calm, and we cannot think. We cannot have critical thinking.
Right.
And so sometimes the freeze response is tied to this biological process. Adrenaline hit, heart rate went up, can't access our critical thinking. We lose our words.
So that's why Samantha would shut down and I'm like, talk to me, come on, I want to fix this, and then I rage, and then I would realize this isn't working, so then I'd shut down in pity and kind of like a protest behavior of, well, you're not going to talk to me, so I can't help, and here we go, and we're just spiraling.
Yeah. And that's a common couple dynamic, that when someone goes into overwhelm, when they lose their words, when they shut down, sometimes people try to force conversation in that place, right? You experience your own primal panic. I can't connect with you. You stop talking, right? It's like talking to a brick wall.
Right. Yep.
I can't reach you. I can't connect with you. And so you have your primal panic.
Yeah.
But in that place, she literally can't talk to you.
Yeah.
It's a biological process. It's overwhelmed. She can't access her frontal lobe, so she can't think. And in that place, sometimes where people, the heart rate goes over 100 beats per minute. They can't access their frontal lobe. Remember, that controls impulses. And so people will then sometimes say or do things that they have to apologize for later because they can't control their impulses.
Makes total sense. So in my videos, I talk a lot about trauma, because I think to the unfaithful, the word trauma goes, wait a minute, okay, that's a big word, right? Like, it's not just pain, it's not just anger, it's not just, oh, you know, he or she's upset. Trauma is a big word of, oh, hey, we've stepped into a whole nother level of pain and hurt here when you understand what trauma is. But I think as a trauma expert, you would be the perfect person to give an example or maybe a clearer definition of what trauma really is, especially to the betrayed spouse.
On a very simple level, we can describe trauma as overwhelm.
Mm.
When a person experiences something that is so stressful that it overwhelms their ability to cope with it, it becomes traumatic.
Wow.
And there's a brain function that goes hand in hand with trauma. So remember that when the amygdala detects danger, it sends out the signal for adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a threshold in the brain in which if the experience is too stressful or too overwhelming, the brain sends out another chemical. It sends out something called cortisol. Now, cortisol is a chemical that wraps around our hippocampus, the part of our brain that stores memories. So let's imagine my hand is the hippocampus. It's our filing cabinet. This is where all of our memories go. Now, humans store all the memories that hurt or harm us, right? We remember danger because we need to know what can hurt or harm us so we can stay alive.
Right.
I have couples who will say, he or she remembers how I hurt them 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Why are they remembering that? Well, because it's in the hippocampus. The brain remembers what hurts or harms us so we can stay alive. But if an experience is so stressful and so overwhelming and cortisol comes into the brain, the cortisol wraps itself around the hippocampus. That means the memory that needs to get filed in the hippocampus can't get in.
Wow.
The cortisol protects it. So the memory, ding, it bounces off. It can't go into the hippocampus. Well, where does the memory go? It goes back to the amygdala, the part of the brain that's scanning for danger. Now, the reason this is important is if we have overwhelming memories sitting in our amygdala, and so someone who's experienced infidelity, a betrayed partner, she or he had attachment distress. It was a primal panic. It was so distressing that the betrayed partner's brain sent out adrenaline and probably cortisol.
Right.
The memory of the betrayal can't go into the hippocampus. It's sitting in the amygdala. So now the betrayed partner has current day experiences. They will detect, oh, I think this is dangerous. The amygdala goes, danger, danger. But the amygdala has these memories sitting in it.
Right.
So now the person experiences current day, I think it's
firing.
Danger,
Yeah.
and a re-experiencing, ding, of this old pain.
Yeah.
So the person doesn't experience just now, it's now and the old stuff. There's a saying, if someone has a $500 reaction to a 50-cent problem, they are experiencing now and something old, some old pain. And that's the memory that's sitting in the amygdala that keeps getting reactivated.
Yes, so good. I think that's such a clear understanding or explanation of what's going on when someone's suffering trauma. And so, this will play all over the world, and many people just can't get to a trauma specialist like you. They can't just, make a few phone calls, Google, and find a trauma specialist, and here we go.
Right.
So what are some practical things that the betrayed spouse, man or woman, can do if they feel like they're really suffering that $500 reaction? Not that infidelity is a 50-cent problem, but there's trauma that when you're experiencing trauma, and there's PTSD. I mean, what are some helpful things that the betrayed spouse can do to try and cope with the trauma that they are experiencing?
Okay. Two thoughts come to mind. The first one is go sensory, and the second one is seek relationship. So let's talk about go sensory. I think of how when we are experiencing a trauma response, our nervous system is overwhelmed, right? It's overreacting. And so this might seem very basic, but we have to soothe our nervous system. And so one one way to do that is to go sensory. So I often encourage my clients, when you are experiencing overwhelm, when you're experiencing a trigger or you're having a trauma response, let's start caring for your nervous system at a very basic sensory level. First thing, drink water. It might seem silly, but we need to hydrate the brain.
Okay.
When stress will dehydrate the brain, if we add water, it will rehydrate the brain. And the more our brain is hydrated, it's correlated with emotional regulation. So if we're dehydrated, we will be more emotional.
Yeah.
If we are hydrated, we'll have a better chance at regulating our emotions.
That's great.
Then think of the senses. So what can you smell, right? Sometimes it's light a candle.
Yeah.
That scent soothes my nervous system. Sometimes ladies will have yummy smelling lotion, and that might soothe their senses. Flowers, the smell of outside.
Yeah.
So we think, what can soothe olfactory? Auditory, what kinds of music can you listen to? For some people, it might be, it could be heavy metal, and that soothes them, or elevator music.
Yeah.
Taste, sometimes food. I encourage my ladies when they are in distress that that's not the time really to worry about counting calories. I'm not encouraging being unhealthy, but I'm saying we would just want to soothe the nervous system.
Yeah.
Tactile. Babies, when they're in distress, we swaddle them.
Yeah.
And so for adults, sometimes it's wrapping ourselves in a blanket. Sometimes it's putting on comfy clothes that aren't restrictive.
Right.
I just want people to care for their bodies on a very basic sensory level, and that helps soothe their nervous system.
That's great.
The next thought is, we heal in relationship. Sometimes when people are distressed, they tend to isolate, pull back, be at home alone. And while that can be temporarily helpful, in the long term, we really need other people to help us heal. And so even if someone doesn't have a therapist or a support group, we need someone who's safe, who can talk with us about our distress, who is not going to tell us what we should or shouldn't do.
Right.
We don't need advice.
No advice giving. We just need a safe place.
A safe landing place to be able to have our emotions, ride the wave, move through the emotions. They will subside, but we need somebody to be with us sometimes while we're trying to re-regulate.
Right. And it's fair to say that this is a normal part of the responses to something as traumatizing as infidelity. That this doesn't mean that my spouse is, off their rocker.
Nope.
They are experiencing what is a normal response to the devastation accompanied with infidelity.
Yes.
Right? Because so often we unfaithful say, oh my gosh, here we go. And we label our spouse, and we wouldn't necessarily say this to our spouse, but in our own mind, we say, she's just a mess, dude. She's just off her rocker. When in reality, after all that we've talked about, there's something going on deeper that we have to be sensitive to.
Right. I often see ladies who come in who've been betrayed, and they tell me stories about seeking help. And if they go to a therapist who doesn't understand infidelity, attachment distress, trauma from the betrayal, they can sometimes be mislabeled.
Yep. And mishandled.
Mishandled, right. And, oh, she's crazy because she's acting like this. And instead, a clearer lens is she's experiencing attachment distress.
Yep.
She's having a biological process happening in her body. She's responding to the adrenaline. She's seeking safety. Sometimes it looks like she's leaning in, and sometimes it looks like she's leaning out. And sometimes she's playing possum and she freezes. And it's all for safety.
So my last question And I'm throwing a little bit of a wild card at you because we haven't talked about this beforehand. But over the past week or two, I have had so many people, whether it be on Twitter or YouTube or affairrecovery.com, who are betrayed spouses, men and women, who want their unfaithful spouse to get help, feel like it's time to maybe draw an ultimatum, but they don't want to be controlling. They don't want to be perceived as controlling. But they are incredibly frustrated, angry, and really, in many ways, heartbroken because they want their unfaithful spouse to get help, but their unfaithful spouse refuses to. And there's this struggle where I don't want to be, this controlling, angry, mean person, but yet we're stuck. And I thought it would be wonderful for you to speak to the betrayed who doesn't want to be controlling but doesn't want to tolerate the way life is going and is maybe afraid to draw an ultimatum, which I think an ultimatum at the right time and the right place is fantastic. So maybe share your expert insight to that struggle for those that are in the middle of that kind of conundrum.
Let's look through the safety lens.
Yeah.
Right? If we put on our glasses and we look at that dynamic, thinking about safety, instead of control, what I hear is a betrayed partner is experiencing distress, doesn't know if he or she is safe in the relationship.
Right.
The betrayed partner wants the unfaithful partner to get help, to maybe get counseling, to be insightful, to figure out what led to the infidelity. That request is for safety. If you, unfaithful partner, can understand why you did what you did, maybe it won't happen again. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can keep ourselves safe.
Right.
And so oftentimes, betrayed spouses will ask the unfaithful spouse to do some counseling, to dig into 12-step work, go to EMS weekend, to figure things out. It's not because they have nothing else to do and they're just trying to control them. It's really about safety. Will you do these behaviors so that we can be safe with each other? Mm-hmm. Now, if someone's in a relationship with an unfaithful partner who refuses to do their work, who refuses to be insightful and figure out what's going on with them, that is a safety risk.
That's right.
There is a lack of safety. And how would somebody feel secure with that person, knowing, okay, you're my person, you've got my back, even though you're not safe for me? It doesn't work. They're asking for them to do things for safety. And so if safety isn't happening in the relationship, it makes sense to me that the betrayed partner will have to create some boundaries to keep themselves safe.
Right.
Not to be controlling, not to be mean. Boundaries.
Not to be parental.
Right. Boundaries aren't meant to be punishing. Boundaries are meant to keep us safe.
That needs to be said again. Because boundaries are not about punishing.
Nope.
And if the person, I say this all the time and I put it on Twitter, and if the person that we are establishing boundaries kind of against loses their mind, it only reinforces the need for those boundaries to be there in the first place, right?
Yeah. Yes. If we set boundaries, if we say a limit, here's my limit, or here's my no, I accept this and not that, how somebody responds to that limit or that boundary is what we call a litmus test to the relationship.
Right.
I can understand if I set a boundary, the person I'm setting the boundary with may initially be upset. I don't like this. What's happening? Oh, this is weird. What are you doing? And that makes sense. That's human to have a response to a new limit. But after that, if they can come back around and say, well, I don't like your boundary, but I'll respect your boundary.
Right.
Now there's safety. I don't have to like somebody's limits or their boundaries, but I do need to respect them.
Yeah.
And so back to this idea of a betrayed spouse asks an unfaithful spouse, will you do some work to figure out how you got here, how we got here?
Yep.
And the person says, nope, not doing it. Okay, now we have a safety issue. And now that is a time to set some healthy boundaries.
And that's okay. Because I think there's a small percentage of betrayed spouses, even big, strong men who love their partner or spouse, their unfaithful spouse says no, and they feel almost this self-shame for wanting to establish these boundaries, right?
Right.
But it's okay.
Encouraged, in fact.
And necessary
Yes.
to draw those boundaries and say, no, it's not okay. I am worth getting help. I am worth these boundaries. I don't have to feel shame for doing this, right?
Right. That it's okay to ask, to say, in order for us to be in relationship, I'm going to need this much safety. If you can work with me to create safety in the relationship, a lot of people say, I'll stay if we're working on creating safety. But if you're not willing to create a safe relationship, how do I stay in this relationship and thrive?
Right.
I often talk with my clients about survive versus thrive. Now, we humans, we can survive in some pretty terrible relationships. And we humans, because of attachment, some of us will stay in really unhealthy relationships for a long period of time.
Right.
We can often survive a lot of distress, but we cannot thrive in that environment. And that's why I see couples who have been unhealthy, over time, if the relationship continues to not be safe over time, what may not have started out being traumatic ends up being traumatic and ends up causing more distress. So it makes sense to me that people will say, I need these things to be safe. If you are unwilling, I'm going to have to figure out what I need to do so that I can not only survive, but to thrive. If you're not being safe, we have to figure out where that line is. And that's not being mean. That's being healthy.
That's great. So this has been just riveting. I mean, I love this. I know that there's so many people that love this, but I have found that whether it be on Twitter or all the different platforms, sometimes and most of the time, the loudest people are not the healed individuals or couples. And so maybe you can take just a couple minutes and really affirm the fact that wherever they're at, whatever they're dealing with, no matter how traumatic the situation or how long it's gone on, that it's absolutely possible to heal, to save your marriage, to find restoration. Because I think the loudest voices are, my spouse cheated and we were done, or I gave up, he would never, she would never, all that stuff. But that's not the total message, right? We don't always hear from the healed. We heal from those who are in kind of the middle.
Right. So I'm a marriage and family therapist. And if I didn't believe that marriages could heal, I would not do this job. I've seen clients in utter distress and despair. I've seen clients on the verge of divorce numerous times. And I've seen healing happen. I absolutely believe that even the most distressed people, the most angry people can and do heal. Thinking about trauma, right, where we talked about having memories sitting in the amygdala that keep getting reactivated. Our brain is amazing. Our brain can heal and rewire. And so trauma is not a sentence. It's not a destiny. It doesn't have to be forever. We absolutely can heal trauma. And luckily, we live in an age where there are multiple forms of trauma treatment. And so we can absolutely heal our brain, our hearts. I've seen people who have just hardened hearts who say, I just can't soften. I can't let him or her in. I might get hurt again. When I see safety being created in those relationships, hearts soften. Healing happens.